Hello, SLEERICKETS listeners. It's Alice, and I'm about to do that thing that sometimes happens on podcasts and YouTube channels and other things, where one of your hosts comes on and says, you know how you like this thing? Well, why don't you check out this other thing that I made? And it's kind of annoying, but it was bound to happen. So it's happening now. About 6 months ago, Jonathan Farmer came to me and said, hey, would you like to do a podcast together? And I was at that point, I think maybe 9 months post retiring Poetry Says, and pretty deep into helping out over here at SLEERICKETS. And I thought, can I fit it in? Don't know. Do I want to do it? Yeah, I think I do. And what we came up with over about maybe another 2 or 3 months of batting ideas around was something that is, I think, like a pretty comfortable sister show to this show. It's just Jonathan and I, no guests, and we are just chatting about what it is to be a poet who just has no answers. Who has no answers, no good advice, no certainty, only questions. The title we came up with, which is sort of a joke, is Advice from an Unknown Poet. We agreed at the outset that we would do 12 episodes. I know I had a huge go at the classic 12-episode podcast that people start and then run out of energy for. But this is different because we decided at the start that we were only going to do 12 episodes, and that's okay, according to me. As I said, it's just Jonathan and I, 12 episodes, no guests, and we have no answers, but we have a lot of questions. Each episode is framed by a question that we play with and maybe come up with a few answers for, but we are always aware that we are not the last word on anything. So what you're about to hear is our first episode. The theme of this episode is fear. And the question that we are trying to answer is, what do you do with the fear that you aren't very good? It's a big one. I think we're both a little nervous. We're very aware that we're trying a new thing. But I think even in this first episode, we get pretty deep. And I just finished recording the 8th episode with Jonathan this morning. And what's really nice about having done this over the last some number of months is that I think what we've ended up with is sort of like one big conversation. Each episode is about sort of 40 to 50 minutes long, and they all feel like they have kind of a through line. So that's kind of nice. To give you a sense of what else we have been chatting about, we have episodes about community. The question there is, how do you deal with the weird mix of professional and personal connection that comes along with relationships in the poetry world? Very thorny question. We have an episode about which pieces of writing advice get on your nerves, which is one that SLEERICKETS listeners helped us out with in a big way. Thank you all for that. We have episodes on productivity, on desire, the desire for recognition specifically, on how we should learn poetry, and a few other things. Like I said, I think it gets pretty deep. It is sort of, there's a different flavor to what you would expect from a SLEERICKETS episode, but it's not so different that I feel bad promoting it here to you. I think it is, like I said, comfortably adjacent, a natural sort of sister show. And I was just thinking too, as I sat down to record this intro, one of the very heartening and beautiful things about being part of this show is that I'm aware that we're part of a larger group of people who are kind of making things together and alongside each other and in conversation with one another. And that is no small thing. That is not something to take for granted. So Advice from an Unknown Poet is just one example of that. And here is our first episode. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Alice.
Would you like to outline for people what it is we are planning to do here?
Yes, in this very natural way, I will do that. So here's what I'm telling myself. We're trying to talk about some of the things that are hard or confusing about trying to write poems as a human being. And we're going to try and be honest and vulnerable without being excruciatingly earnest.
We're gonna try not to be
Yeah,
excruciatingly
no
honest.
promises.
Probably
Yeah.
often fail at that. Yeah.
It occurred to me as I was getting ready, like, I do think one of the things that makes this maybe appealing to me is that I think one of the things that you and I have in common is that we both like have most of our like professional and social lives outside of poetry world. And I think that's a sort of complicating factor, or maybe a simplifying factor that we have in common.
Totally, because we could both just stop and nothing would really change about our lives, right? Like, yeah, that's sort of a scary thought. But yeah, so we've got a number of questions to run through. Each episode is going to be framed around a question. And I'm excited for this first one, which has to do with fear, which I'm an expert in.
So then, what do you do with the fear that you aren't very good?
Yeah, I think this was the first question we came up with. And I like the way it's phrased because it's almost as if we're saying, maybe you are very good, but you're just afraid that you might not be very good. When the reality is, of course, that all of us frequently, most of the time, are not very good. We all churn out pretty bad work. That is part of what being a writer is. And yet we remain afraid of this not being very good, even though it's happening all the time. So I just wanted to start by pointing out the weird kind of paradox there.
Yeah, and I'm realizing that we've already maybe like had a cultural gap between us because when I threw that question out there, I was thinking of the phrase meaning, what do you do with the fear that you're bad? Like not very good in my American ear means not that you are not very good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good point. What do you do with the fear that you're bad? So I just turned 43. I started writing when I was about 25. And so I know some things about writing and writing poems. But what I feel that I know most about is this particular fear. Just as an experiment, when I was thinking about recording this episode, I put this question to a dear friend of mine, a friend in poetry, the person I trust most to tell me when I'm bad. And she said, oh, you just lean on your unhealthy coping mechanisms, obviously. Like, go to those unhealthy places and sublimate the fear.
I can't guarantee that I wouldn't be leaning on my unhealthy coping mechanisms if I didn't have that fear.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're going to be doing the unhealthy coping mechanisms anyway, obviously, but it's a pretty, it gives the unhealthy coping mechanisms a certain glamour. Like it's meaningful that I'm having this bourbon because I'm so sad that I wrote this terrible poem. Anyway, so I want to get specific about what the fear is before we go too much further. So the fear that you're bad, the fear that you've always been bad, that you always will be bad, that everyone can see that you're bad. And then from that, these people will dismiss, dislike, ignore you because you're bad. So essentially, it kind of comes down to the usual fear of being cast into the wilderness with no access to food and protection, which is a very human thing.
One thing that raises the stakes for that is that I think for most of us, maybe this isn't true of you, but I think for most of us, writing poems always has this element of self-fashioning or fashioning an alternate self. And so there's like a double badness to it. Like it's not just that I'm bad at this skill, but also that I'm trying to like put forward a version of myself. And so I just think it's really hard to get this away from questions of identity. And like you say, from questions of social validation or humiliation. And I kind of think maybe that's more intense than it would be. I don't know if you were really committed to being a basketball player, but maybe that's just me because I knew I'd failed as a basketball player by the age of 18. And at 51, I'm still trying to see if I could be any good at this thing.
Well, I mean, there are like visible, measurable ways to know whether you're good or bad at playing basketball, right? But when you figured that out at 18, did you feel like you'd lost some part of your identity? Did you feel like you had to make a new version of yourself?
I'd actually figured it out much earlier than that. Um, like, I think I was like losing a perspective identity around that time, but it wasn't really that I was going to be a good basketball player. Like, I never was skillful enough or dedicated enough that was ever like a live possibility. So that I was lying to myself about it, but the lie was always pretty thin. But I was also kind of finally coming to the end of a failed attempt at creating one kind of social identity for myself, of being somebody who could fit in a certain kind of place, which was not unrelated to the basketball culture and all of that. And so that lie was running out, and that was the more meaningful lie that was running out. And so I was trying to find something I could be because being ordinary seemed intolerable because I actually felt like I was unlovable, and so like I couldn't just like being ordinary wouldn't be enough to hide the
Mm,
fact that I
mm.
was awful. So writing poems became this sort of cheap and easy way of manufacturing an identity. And I think one of the complicating factors of this question for me is that I feel like the foundation of my whole relationship to writing poems and subsequently to reading poems, and that was the order I did it in, that foundation is like rotten or at least rickety and has always been. And so there's just this awareness of something a little bit dishonest back there.
I mean, yeah, I kind of like, I don't want to let you say that about yourself for a lot of reasons, but one reason is that I feel like maybe that's because there's a comparison between yourself as you know you and a like a fantasy version of a writer who writes poetry for the pure love of language because they're just moved to like work with words and make art from words and like I don't know. Is that a real person?
I mean, probably, but like I really didn't like have much interest in poems. Like I didn't have much. I wasn't a big reader as a kid. There wasn't something I was trying to communicate except for the idea that I was important. Like that was the only thing I was trying to communicate when I started writing poems.
I mean, I think that's everybody. I really do. I just think that some people are like less honest with themselves about it than you have just been. I mean, we're all just trying to like scratch our names on a into a tree here. Like that's what we're
Yeah,
doing.
I mean, I'm not saying that like most writers are saints or hermits or anything like that, but I do think most people actually like poems a little bit when they start writing poems.
Mm, well, I didn't. I mean, I came at it from exactly the same. I came at it from exactly the same trajectory as you almost. Like I wasn't playing basketball, but I was like told by adults, oh, you're good at this writing thing. You should
Mhm.
be a poet. And then to please the adults, I kind of went along with that. And to feel important and to feel like there was something about my identity that was extraordinary and very much wrote first and started reading later. Now, I think I can say pretty honestly that I do like poetry for its own sake, but I came to that through trying to make it, trying to be my version of like what a poet is, which I didn't really know much about when I started. But yeah, I can see how this is like a pretty complicated thing because if it turns out that this thing that you built an identity around is something that you are in fact bad at, like that's a pretty extreme thing to have to contend with. I mean, the interesting thing about this fear for me is that it motivates such intense, it motivates actions that can really skew and distort and sometimes even ruin your life because you're trying to protect yourself. And not just yourself as a poet, but yourself as a person, yourself as like the person you created.
And I think for me, there's this kind of, the sunk cost fallacy. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I've wasted 33 years of my life trying to be this person. It would be stupid to stop now. And I think the one thing I can say that has been helpful is, and it's amazing how long it took me to figure this out, is that I finally started writing about things I was interested in. And I finally started enjoying writing.
Mm.
Like for so long, I didn't like writing. It didn't give me any pleasure. I didn't look forward to it. It was very dutiful.
Yeah.
And it's only been in the last, I think, probably like 8 or so years, that I've really come to a point where like writing something I look forward to doing. But even then, part of the pleasure is inextricable from the hope that what I'm doing is making something good. It's not, there's an aspect of it that feels a little bit like working on a puzzle, except if I believed all I was doing was working on a puzzle that I would never show anyone and that no one would like, I think that pleasure would dissipate.
Yeah, and I just think like it's pointless and not even really necessary to try to get away from that fear of not being liked because like I said before, this is a fear of being cast out into the wilderness. This is a fear of being alone. And obviously, we know intellectually that we're not in danger if we're alone and that we can live without the support and love of others, but we don't want to.
I wonder too if there isn't this like other awareness that we're doing something kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, obviously.
Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
we're we've staked so much of our identity on something that most people don't even think is like admirable to begin with. And
yeah,
so to
yeah.
be doing something disreputable and doing it badly, is kind of a double whammy.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, let me into the cave. I wrote you this poem. Here are some of the things that I have tried to do with this fear. I want to outline these things because I feel like this fear really can drive your behavior in weird directions. The first thing I did was to aim really, really low. So basically, to ensure by aiming to publish in places that I knew couldn't reject me, that I never had to feel the pain of rejection. So I did that for a while. After that, I just avoided writing for long, long stretches of time. And I think if I added up all the stretches of time that I haven't been writing because I've been too busy with work or something like that, it would far outstrip the amount of time that I've spent actually consistently working on poems. Related to that is I have replaced writing with things like work, difficult people, difficult relationships, other very stressful situations. And another thing that I've done, maybe this is like less problematic, but still is not about facing the fear, is that I have spent a lot of time helping other people to write and make creative work instead of focusing on my own stuff. Those have all been detours and distractions. And yeah, you talk about the sunk cost. There's also the knowledge that you spent so much time like not doing it as well as the time that you've spent doing it. So yeah, that's been my that's been the ways that it's driven me off track.
I would add to that that I found bitterness to be a very useful self-destructive technique.
Bitterness is good.
Blaming everyone else. You know, they've failed to see my genius.
Mm.
They value the wrong things, et cetera, et cetera. Hiding, I find works really well. Like if I never send things out, which I basically don't until I have to. That's helpful. I can sit alone with myself, and the coin keeps turning in the air, but partially imagine that I'm writing the great American poem.
That's nice.
But I do think if there's a second reason I started writing beyond just wanting an identity, it's that, and this comes a little bit, or maybe a reason I kept writing would be a better description. It's that you don't have to get it right the first time. And a lot of social life was frustrating for me because I couldn't get it right in conversation. I couldn't think fast enough. I wasn't witty enough. And with writing, you can just keep going at it until it feels right. Of course, that's still bound up with this question we're asking. Do you believe that whatever version of right you're reaching for is actually going to be any good when you get there? But I do still cherish the fact that, like, I can sit down and just work on it for a while. And if after I've worked on it for a while, it's trash, I can go back and work on it the next day. And if it's still trash, I can go back and work on it 2 weeks later. And if it's still trash, I can try something else. And nobody will see it. And then eventually there comes that point where you do send it out into the world and nobody wants it. And then that, like, it's so, like, I deal with it so badly. I deal with the rejection so badly. It just ruins everything for me. Like a single rejection, and I'm just done for a week. So I hide. And then, of course, we try and have friends whose opinions we value, but also who we think will tell us the truth.
I mean, that person, whoever that person is, as a writer, has got to be one of the most precious people in your life, right? Because they're actually the only person who can answer this question. You can't answer it really, because no matter how well you've honed your instincts for whether today's draft is better than yesterday's, the fact is you might be too in love with the idea. You might have started working on something that just like couldn't ever work. Yeah, that person is so, so precious. So maybe that's one possible answer. What to do with the fear that you're bad. Get someone else to tell you how you're doing.
Yeah, and that has to be somebody who you're going to hear bad things from sometimes. If that
Absolutely.
if that if that person, like, I sent something to a former professor that I've been working on. He's like, "So you're doing this thing over here?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's stupid."
That's great. That's
And
great. Yeah.
I sent a different version of it to him later, and he liked it. And I was pretty confident that he wasn't lying to me because he called me an idiot before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess to take that idea a little bit further, you probably want ideally sort of a brain's trust, because that one person who says, well, that's stupid, could be wrong also.
And could be wrong also when they say this is good,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or they could be, you know, you can get a kind of capture with that oh, you get so focused on this person's perspective and their taste, like they
Yes.
become so important to you as a reader that can, yeah, constrain your imagination.
I want to try to come at this from a slightly different angle as well. Like, what about the people who never think that they're bad? I'm sure you know of at least one. Like, we've all met these poets who think they are incapable of writing a bad draft. I mean, you and I might be a little bit too far at the other end of the spectrum, but what about I mean, they strike real fear into me, because it's like, wait a minute, wait a minute. You think everything you do is good. You can't see yourself clearly. That probably means that I can't see myself clearly either. Maybe nobody can see themselves clearly.
And maybe, like, I just assume those people wake up screaming in the middle of the night
I
sometimes.
don't think they do. I don't think
They
they
don't.
do. No, I think they just like have happy lives. I think it's like totally
What
straightforward for them.
assholes.
I know.
Fuck them.
I know. Fuck those guys. Yeah.
So, okay, so do you think there is any overlap between people who feel like that and people who make good art?
That's what I'm always wondering. I think they have exactly the same run rate that we do. Like, I think, like, your chances of making good art are just, it's just a question of like surface area. Doing it enough that maybe eventually you get to a good poem. Maybe by the end of your life, you get five good ones. Maybe if you're a real genius, you get like 20. Confidence might help you because as a confident person, you might write more and hide less. That might be the only way in which they're better.
I kind of wonder if it doesn't run in the other direction. That if you have somehow set up your life and your psyche in such a way so that like every time you press the bar, you get another hit of cocaine, that when you're that rat, like I think, how do you keep from just hitting the same bar over and over again? Like, how do you not just ride that high into nothingness, into something that just doesn't have any life in it?
So you mean if you have extreme confidence in your work, you feel like every time you sit down to write, you shit gold. How do you stop yourself
And
from,
then your friends come over and say, "Oh, look, what a lovely gold turd you just shat." Um, yeah, wouldn't you
yeah,
just
wouldn't you just
end
keep,
up shitting gold all the time? Or
I mean, yeah, I think this is the other kind of danger. Like you and I face the danger of like our inner critic runs the show to the point where we don't write, we hide, we don't send things out, and we basically like don't have careers because the fear is so big. I think the other extreme is that you have what looks to you like a career. Like I definitely know poets like this. Heaps of books,
yeah.
like, and sort of, some wins.
By wins in this case, you mean good poems, not like awards or
Yeah, maybe I mean both of those things, but I was meaning like external markers of you did good, like yeah, this book won a prize or you did place second in this particular poetry competition or whatever. So it looks to you like you're doing pretty well, but actually if you lined both of us up like at the very end of our lives and careers, you would have pretty much exactly the same amount of good, worthwhile stuff. I also think that person can end up very bitter because they think they're amazing and yet they're not getting the recognition that they think they deserve. So in the end, we probably both end up at the same place.
so maybe I'm revealing just how superstitious my relationship with poems is, but I just feel like if you just sit down and turn on the machine and the machine just stamps the next poem the same way it stamped the previous poem, the same way it stamped the poem before that, I think something's going to be missing. I get really antsy when people start talking about like the rules or the code or you can do this in a poem and it'll work really well and because I do think, and I don't know if this is a reasonable thing. Think isn't even the right word. I do feel, assume, imagine that the life of the poem comes at least in part, not entirely, but at least in part from the work of trying to say something and to say it in a way that's true or rich or pleasing. And I mean, maybe you can just, you know, crank out poems that are pleasing. Like I do feel like there's some people who can just kind of run the machine for the funny poem, and it keeps cranking out like mildly. Well, no, I don't think those poems are any good either. Yeah, I just I think if you're not engaging in some serious, and maybe this all surely this all sometimes happens in just a stroke of inspiration, but if you're not trying to figure out how do I say this thing and how do I understand this thing, how do I get this thing into a form, and I'm using form really loosely here, into a form that's right for it or that it can then be right for. Like there's so many poems I read that it just feels like you sat down to write a poem. It was time to write a poem and you wrote a poem. So you came up with this exercise
Yeah, God,
and then
yeah.
you put it out there.
Yeah.
And if it's not compelled by some investment that's independent of the desire to write a poem, and
Mm.
the assumption that having written a poem is valuable in and of itself, that because poems are inherently valuable or because you writing poems is inherently valuable. I think the life's going to go out of it.
Yeah, and that actually comes back to your first point about identity, because that poet who
Mm-hmm.
sits down and runs the machine every day and churns out mediocre to passable work that gets published because everyone's standards are so low, that person is performing their identity to themselves and probably feels pretty satisfied. Whereas what you're talking about is not only doubting the value of even sitting down to do it, but like you're actually engaging with a doubt to do with your identity. Like, do I even have anything to say? Am I even a poet at this point? And I think that doubt is important. Like if I have to choose between these two like personas that we've set up here, I'm always going to choose the doubting one because I think the doubting one is the only one who really knows what reality is.
Yeah, and like I don't think either of those positions are good ones to write from. Like I don't think if you're just like mired in self-loathing or fear when you're writing, that's not good. But I think that kind of confidence is just too much insulation from what you're doing.
Yeah, they're both risky, but they're different kinds of risk.
I mean, you do have to feel like I have to feel like I shouldn't generalize. I have to feel like if I keep working on this, if I keep trying a different thing, if I keep switching out the variables, eventually I'm going to get something that's worthwhile. You know, there does have to be that prospect. But if I'm just like, again, if I just turn on the machine, there's no ghost in that machine. There's no soul in it. Not that I really am confident there's such a thing as a soul, but
Yeah, someone was talking the other day about fear and faith both being types of uncertainty, but one
mm,
is I don't know what's going to happen and it's probably going to be bad. And the other one is I don't know what's going to happen, but it might be good. But yeah, I think there's that thing about sitting down and turning on the machine. The routine has helped me with this
mhm,
fear. I have certainly like I did something one year where I was like, I'm going to write a poem every day for 100 days. And I did that. I knew that I might get 5 or 10 drafts worth working on from that
mhm,
exercise, but that's all I really wanted. But honestly, the thing that has helped me most with this is the thing that I didn't do at the start and haven't done really seriously until probably even the last 5 years, which is just reading a lot of work and reading without the assumption that the writer is automatically good because they are published,
mhm.
like actually building a critical approach to reading that builds that muscle that helps you to practice going, do I like this poem? Do I think this is done well? Which parts of this are speaking to me? Which parts aren't? And then you can like take that back to your own work. But I think when I was younger, I expected that to be an instinct that would just eventually come along. Whereas I now realize that it's actually something you have to practice pretty consciously.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is about being good, you have to have some imagination of what goodness sounds like. You know,
Mm. It's not just you measuring your work against your other work. It's you measuring your work against everybody else's as well. And if you never look at anyone else's writing, which plenty of poets don't, then you won't have a good sense of that.
and I think this is not so much true with living poets who obviously have the capacity to judge me and reject me, but there is a kind of companionship. And people would tell me this when I was younger, and I didn't experience it. But there is a kind of companionship in having these poets or these voices, these patterns of imagination speaking to you and present to you when you're working. That I feel like writing is obviously a very isolated activity. Maybe some people do, but I'm not like interacting with other people while I'm writing. I'm sitting by myself or off in a corner away from other people, and it helps. In the same way that I think some people find value in being kind of part of a ethnic tradition or having these cultures. There's just a sense that like I'm there's a sense of belonging that can come from that, and that belonging can run out real fast when you realize you're writing trash. But it doesn't feel as isolated when you are trying to accommodate those other minds and those other voices.
Do you know the W.S. Merwin poem Berryman?
I don't think so.
Oh, could I read it to you?
Please.
Because yeah, I feel like this kind of responds to that. Like this is W.S. Merwin writing about meeting and working under or with John Berryman and his memories of doing that. And when I read this poem for the first time many years ago, I felt like, yeah, that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of like a family of weird misfits. So I'll read it to you. Berryman by W.S. Merwin. I will tell you what he told me in the years just after the war, as we then called the Second World War. Don't lose your arrogance yet, he said. You can do that when you're older. Lose it too soon, and you may merely replace it with vanity. Just one time, he suggested changing the usual order of the same words in a line of verse. Why point out a thing twice? He suggested I pray to the muse, get down on my knees and pray right there in the corner. And he said he meant it literally. It was in the days before the beard and the drink, but he was deep in tides of his own, through which he sailed, chin sideways and head tilted like a tacking sloop. He was far older than the dates allowed for, much older than I was. He was in his 30s. He snapped down his nose with an accent I think he had affected in England. As for publishing, he advised me to paper my wall with rejection slips. His lips and the bones of his long fingers trembled with the vehemence of his views about poetry. He said the great presence that permitted everything and transmuted it in poetry was passion. Passion was genius, and he praised movement and invention. I had hardly begun to read. I asked, how can you ever be sure that what you write is really any good at all? And he said, you can't. You can't. You can never be sure. You die without knowing. You die without knowing whether anything you wrote was any good. If you have to be sure, don't write.
Yeah, I like that. I will say I've never, and maybe this, I've never liked the advice about like just sending stuff out all the time, sending out so many things. And maybe it's just because I'm too much of a coward to do it, but it feels crass in a way that I just feel like would have to infect your spirit at some point to spend so much time thinking about publication. And maybe the reality is that most people can do that and not think about publication very much. But trying to like rack up the publications, just I don't know. I've always gone in fear of that attitude.
Mm, well, yeah, I mean, it's not pretty. Like, it's not the best part of writing at all. It's definitely the most mercenary and yeah, I think it probably does infect your spirit. I think that's probably right. I made myself do it, like follow that advice really early on because of my grandmother, who was a very talented writer, poet, short story writer. Her brother was a very well-known poet here in Australia. She, I think, was the better writer of the family of that generation, but didn't send work out because, according to my dad, she had a absolute phobia about rejection. I mean, I don't know how true any of this is. Like, we can't possibly know. This type of family history is also kind of like misty. But yeah, when I heard that, I just thought, well, I need to do the opposite. And I need to get, because yeah, I mean, it's essentially exposure therapy. Like, you get those rejections and they really fucking hurt. They hurt so bad, particularly at the start. And they still hurt bad now sometimes. But I think if you just keep moving, then, it's like dating. It's like, all right, well, that guy didn't like me, but maybe the next guy will, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's
Sounds
not,
awful too.
yeah, it's awful. It is awful, but I don't really see much alternative. But maybe we can debate that in a future conversation because that sounds like
Yeah,
a much bigger question.
I will say maybe related to this, certainly going back to where we started before we even put the question on the table, is I do think there is something really helpful, at least for me, about this state of not having a job in the poetry world, which, at one point I really wanted. But there's this kind of sleight of hand I'm able to do with myself where when I'm worried I'm bad at writing, I can think, well, okay, but I care about my students and I'm doing good work for them. And then when I feel like a failure as a teacher, and be like, well, okay, but I'm over here writing these poems and these essays as well. And so it's kind of, going back to the identity thing, it's kind of like a belt and suspenders thing, except that like it may be that neither the belt nor the suspenders are reliable. But if I just keep switching back and forth between belt and suspenders constantly, like somehow my pants will stay up.
That's really good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing for sure. That's like, yeah, and when I haven't had employment that I feel good about, that puts more pressure on the poems.
Mhm.
And that does make things harder in a way that can be good because that can be motivating. It's like, well, you don't have a job, so you better sort out this poetry thing. I guess for me, I don't really believe in either of those things as a sustainable or a real way to like frame my identity. Like,
That's why you got to keep it blurry. Just keep
give it a
switching back and
no,
forth so you can
yeah.
never see it clearly.
No, I mean, I tend to try to like focus on a third way of being, which is to just like try to move through the world in a way that helps other people and doesn't harm
Mhm.
people, which, I fail at all the time. That's my belt and my suspenders and my pants are always falling down in that area. But
And your elastic waistband.
yeah, my elastic waistband. Yeah. One other little thing I wanted to mention. Have you ever looked at this book called Proxies by Brian Blanchfield? He's a poet, essayist guy.
Yeah, what's funny? I went to undergrad with him and
Really?
had a class with him, and he was really brilliant. And yeah, I've read some of his stuff, and he's obviously really, really good. But like the Venn diagram between what's most interesting to him and what's most interesting to me, I don't think there's a lot of overlap in that. And I didn't know him very well. He was just this like very kind, very, very smart guy who was in one of my classes. So I haven't paid as much attention to his writing as I probably should, given that.
Yeah, look, and I barely, like, I've only just glanced at the book over somebody's shoulder because it was being read out at the little poetry reading group that I go to. Someone was reading from it. It was the first time I'd encountered him. It's this book that is kind of like a little bit like Anne Boyer's The Undying and Maggie Nelson's Blue. It's kind of like not really a book of poetry, but it's also not really a book of essays. But I just like this little thing that he does. He starts every essay with a little epigraph where he just says, permitting shame, error, and guilt, myself the single source. So he's just basically saying to himself and then to the reader, like, I'm just gonna say at the outset that I'm kind of embarrassed by this and there's going to be a lot of mistakes in it and it's all just coming from me.
Isn't that like scaffolding? And shouldn't you take the scaffolding down
Well, I
once you've
wondered that actually. As I'm saying it, I'm like, you could argue that he should delete that. Not like, it's like, it's very precious. It's very like, look at me, I'm being, but I just thought it was could be kind of a useful thing to do as you sit down to run the machine is to just say, like, this machine's going to spit out some weird stuff. Most of it will be bad, but some of it might actually be good. We need to permit that as well.
Yeah, and being available to writing badly is probably part of what you have to do to get someplace good. If you're gonna just maintain your competence all the time, it's gonna be real hard to surprise yourself.